So, speaking of the life of Heritage, this season, I think, is going to be a pivot point for a lot of us because we're talking about something, a topic that is an often unpleasant topic, and it is the topic of change. Change is something that regularly takes us by surprise. We started this series last week, and just to kind of get us back into the headspace of talking about what the Bible has to say about change, I want to ask you to do something. I want to ask you to just stand up where you are, and I want you to change seats somewhere in this room. Just pick a chair, kick them out, tell them they got to go find another chair, and I want you to just move locations, get all your stuff together. Yeah, you can tell. I'm totally kidding. I know a few of you are like waiting, like, is he serious? Because I'm ready to go. And a lot of people hate you because you love change and you just roll with it. And people are like, how can you do that? And most of the time, we are people who will gather up our stuff and go out to the car. Because I know where my chair is in this room, and I get a little tipped over if I walk in and somebody's sitting in my chair. So this is how we are. This is how we are around change, especially in life. When a change comes that we didn't see it coming, we didn't choose it, we don't like it, it's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant, it's far outside of our routine, it's far out of our comfort zone. There's going to be pain involved. There's going to be adjustments and compromise involved. This is why we tend to say it. We kind of instinctively hate change. And what we need to deal with today is that change is coming for you. Change is coming for you. That kind of change is coming for you if you're not already in it. Some of us might be in it right now, and that's what we're here to talk about. And more importantly, we're here to talk about what God has to say about that, how he might encourage us in that, how the Bible can walk us through that level of change. Little refresher, if you were here last week, you know that one of the main ideas that we walked away from was this one, is that you and I are never more teachable than we are in the midst of change. And that's going to be critical to know, because you and I like to be people who mature. We grow. We would be embarrassed if the fact was that we hadn't, over the last 10 years, gotten better, that we hadn't grown up at all. And when we allow, this is an opportunity that change always brings, like it or not, ready or not, here's the opportunity, is that when we allow God to position us where we've never been before and teach us something that we never knew before, we are always going to grow. That's a good thing. We want to be ready for that opportunity. Meanwhile, if you reject change, you reject growth. If you avoid change at all costs, you are avoiding your own growth. This is the opportunity. You're never more teachable than you are in the midst of change. So what? Well, this is what we learned. So sit up. I mean, not now. I'm talking about in the midst of change. Get ready to learn something. You're going to learn something. You're going to grow. You're never more teachable than you are in the midst of change. So sit up. If you missed that message, you can go online. We have a channel on YouTube channel, Heritage Round Lake Beach. You can catch that. Here's where we're going to go today. What we're going to learn today is that you're also never more vulnerable than you are in the midst of change. Let's think about that one together. In life, when the unpleasant occurs, when the unexpected occurs, we often react poorly. True or false? Unexpected, unpleasant, we often react poorly. If that wasn't true, then we wouldn't enjoy watching these guys every single year. Like we watch them for this. And some of you are thinking, he's a little early to be bringing up a Christmas movie. Nope. Check the sales papers. It's mid-September. I'm right on time. So this is Marv and Harry, if you've been living under a rock. We watch Home Alone every year because of how they react in the midst of change and the unexpected. We watch so that we could, this is the best part of the movie, right? They collide into each other. We love to watch them burn their own hands and pierce their own feet and get concussions from slipping on ice and electrocute themselves and all of this pain and self-torture. We like it. We like it. We think it's kind of comical, and if we're being honest, it kind of reminds us of us. Like it gives us a picture of how clumsy we can be when something has caught us by surprise and we are reacting in the midst of change. I want to ask you if you can remember the last time that this has been proven in your life. Do you remember? Do you remember the surprise bill that came in the mail? How you reacted to that? What you said, what you did. Do you remember the surprise diagnosis? Do you remember the surprise pregnancy? Some of the things that happened there. So it's a lot of words, a lot of actions. We wish we could get back. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think it's so predictable about our kind that if we're not very careful, we are going to make things go from bad to worse in the middle of a change? Why is that so predictable? Why do we have to watch out for that? Like, we have to expect that. Well, I'll give you at least one verse that would answer that question. It's 1 Peter 5. And you don't have to turn there. I'll just put it on the screen. This is a word to Christians trying to grow, and the word is this: stay alert. Watch out. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. That's a real thing. Maybe you didn't know that. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're not a Christian, doesn't change the fact you need to know you have a great enemy. He has a singular purpose of getting back at God by trying to take you out. He loves to see when you go off road. He wants to see you damage yourself and your loved ones. And if you're following me so far, then just guess, when is one of the most opportune times for him to strike? Just take a guess. Right, it's in the midst of change. When he can catch you when you're most off balance, you're most tipped over, you're most disoriented, when you are least familiar with your surroundings, that's when he is wisest to strike. In other words, when you are tipped over in life and you're bumbling around like Marv and Harry, Kevin McAllister is right around the corner. And he's rubbing his hands together. It is his delight to help you destroy yourself. This enemy of ours, the devil, he loves to tempt us when our guard is down to have reactions in the midst of trial, in the midst of transitions that have long-lasting negative repercussions and effects. Hasn't the last 2 years of headlines proven this for us over and over again? The number of friendships that have fallen apart, the number of marriages that have crumbled under the stress, the number of churches that have split in two, pastors who have quit their jobs, like all of this because we failed to respond wisely and gracefully in the midst of change. This is the danger that we don't often talk about. You are vulnerable. You're never more vulnerable than you are in the midst of change. So what? So watch out. And that's what we're going to learn how to do today. Watch out. The thing that we want to learn to say. How many people here, how many coffee lovers here have finally learned to tell the people in your life, don't talk to me until I've had my coffee? Like, you expect that, right? Like, you know how many lives you've saved just by actually getting out there. Why? Because you finally realized something. You came to, in the middle of the unexpected, you've learned to expect something. And when we learn to expect how vulnerable we are, we just come to expect it. That's a good thing. And here's the thing we really need to watch out for. There's no greater, how can I say this? Just, you are never more dangerously unprotected in the midst of change than when it comes to spiritual vulnerability. Spiritual vulnerability, that is the worst. In the midst of the unexpected, expect this. In the midst of the unexpected, you can expect temptation. That's spiritual vulnerability. That's when you can get hurt the most, and that's when the wound, the fallout, will last the longest. If you're anything like me, you know this. In the middle of frustration, in the middle of disappointment, in the middle of unforeseen circumstances, when they take you by surprise, these are the times we make rash, foolish decisions from a very unhealthy place. And the Bible's got so much it's going to teach us today. We're going to learn it all from the account of a guy that we read about in the very first book of the Bible. If you brought one with you, or you can reach out to one that we'd be happy to loan you, turn to Genesis, first book of the Bible, and follow along with me, starting at Genesis chapter 37. The name of the man whose story we're going to use today to learn how to watch out in our own lives, the name of the man is Joseph. And Joseph's story goes from chapter 37 all the way to 50. It is a page turner. I challenge you to read that story this week. That story is filled with villains and underdogs. It's full of twists and turns. But you're going to be hard pressed to find a better example in the Bible of someone who was forced to endure more change. And I'm talking about like mind-blowing, heart-wrenching, like will-crushing change. You find it here in Joseph. We're going to touch on some of the highlights of Joseph's story today from God's Word. And we're going to do that as a way of noting, you ready? We're going to do this as a way of noting the kinds of temptations that we can expect when change comes our way. And I'm talking about any season of significant change. This is going to help, all right? So Genesis chapter 37, we come onto the scene. We meet Joseph when he's a young guy. He's a teenager. 37, verse 4 says, his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't even say a kind word to him. We come to understand that he's the favorite son among many siblings, and they're all jealous about that. A few verses later, you'll see that they were so jealous that they thought, man, if we could just be rid of him, if we could just kill him and not get caught, our lives would be so much better. Day comes where they find that opportunity. They're out in the wilderness. They're out taking turns shepherding, and here comes Joseph, and they realize this is our chance. If we could just kill him and cover it up, things will be better. And at the last minute, one of the brothers pipes up. He comes to his senses. He says, guys, we can't kill Joseph. He's our brother. Sell him? We could do that. We could sell him. It's brotherly love for you. And because this caravan of traders from a foreign land comes by, they sell their own brother for 20 pieces of silver. They tear up his robe. They dip it in the blood of a wild animal. They take it home. He's like, Pops, we're so sorry to tell you, but Joseph is dead. And meanwhile, Joseph is actually being carted off into another country. Chapter 39 says that Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. So this caravan that has just purchased property of this young man who will now be a slave for the rest of his life, they removed him about 300 miles from his home. And then a very powerful man named Potiphar, he's the captain of the guard for the Pharaoh. He purchases him from them, from those Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So we got a teenager here. He's in a new country. He's got a new job. He's in a foreign culture. He's submersed into a foreign language. He has 0 friends. He has 0 family. His identity has basically been erased. Wouldn't you say it's safe to say that Joseph was experiencing some unforeseen changes in his life? And I can only imagine how many "Where are you, God?" prayers came out of Joseph's heart, came out of Joseph's tears in the midst of all this change. But the very next verse tells us something that really messes with our assumptions in moments like those when life takes a terrifying turn. It says, the Lord was with Joseph. It turns out the Lord knows where Egypt is too. And you and I are thinking, come on, if the Lord was with me, I wouldn't be a slave today. I wouldn't have been betrayed. I would have been given cooler brothers. Like, all the hard things in my life wouldn't be there if the Lord was actually with me. So this kind of messes with the things we tend to assume in the middle of change, isn't it? That's why I want to give you temptation number one. There's 3 of these if you're a note taker. Temptation number 1 that we need to learn to watch out for in the midst of change is to assume that I've been abandoned. That's a natural assumption. To assume that I've been abandoned. A terrible change will challenge everything you have believed about God's ability to know your whereabouts, about God's ability to stay close and be helpful. Everything you've ever believed about God's presence in your life, it just becomes very tempting to doubt that. When life gets hard, we feel justified in doubting that, don't we? Like we have a right. We have a right to doubt that. We become embittered. We become angry. And many of us have been in a season like this. We don't just visit those thoughts. We build a house there. And there are people who have started to construct their entire philosophy of life. Their entire theology begins to be built around their circumstances and what happened to them and what was taken away, rather than built around the God of the universe who is bigger than all of our circumstances. It's an assumption that we tend to make, but you need to know something about God today. Scripture tells us fact, that our God is an omnipresent God. That word means that he is just too big to go missing. And he's too big to lose track of you. Let me give you some scripture truth. God said this to his people through the prophet Jeremiah. Is there a hiding place that you have that you think I can't find? Can anyone hide from me in a secret place? Am I not everywhere in all of the heavens and the earth? Here's what David wrote. I could never escape from your spirit. I could never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you're there. If I go down to the grave, you're there. If I ride on the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there, your hand will guide me. Your strength will support me. Late in the New Testament, the writer of Hebrews is writing to beaten down early Christians, and he walks them through biblical history, and this is the conclusion. This is the bottom line he gets them to. God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You might have heard that verse before, but you know that in the original Greek that this was written in, that line is known as a quintuple negative. You won't find another verse like this in the Bible. A quintuple negative. In other words, God is saying, no, never, not going to happen, can't happen, won't happen. You're never out of God's reach. You can't escape from his presence. And in life, when you've got the wind knocked out of you, just like Jeremiah, just like David, just like the early Christians, just like Joseph, don't believe the lie that the enemy will slip into your right coat pocket. It's the lie that maybe God never existed, or that God exists, but he's rejected and abandoned you. Or he really does want to be close to you, but you've been moved 300 miles out of his reach, and he's like, oh, I wish I could. False. Fake news. That's a lie. God is as close to you and me as the air on our skin. As the story goes on, God shows that he's with Joseph. He helps him survive the change. He blesses him in his new job. Everybody's taking notice. Joseph's kind of a rock star. Potiphar takes notice. He doesn't even have a second thought about anything that goes on in his entire household, because he's got this one killer slave named Joseph who's just running everything. Everybody's noticing. Including, verse 7, after a while, Potiphar's wife took notice of Joseph. And she said, "Come to bed with me." Gives him the old "come hither." And that might have been flirty, that might have been invitational, but I think it's important to understand the context of this. This woman is married to one of the most powerful men in all of the land, and we're in her house. Joseph is property. Joseph is a young punk slave, valuable slave, but he has no rights. So this is just as much of a demand than it is an invitation. Now, I want you to slip your shoes into Joseph's sandals or Nikes or whatever they wore in Egypt. I don't know. How easy do you think this could have been to say okay? I mean, haven't you been in a place in life where you knew what your ethics are, you knew what you believed between right and wrong, but circumstantially, it just seemed like you could concede and say, well, I really didn't, my hands were tied? I mean, this has got to be one of those situations, right? Also, hadn't there been times where you feel like you knew the right thing to do, but you kind of didn't want to do it? You would have been happy to do the other thing, and this was like the perfect excuse to not do the right thing? Don't you think that's this situation? I mean, consider Joseph's wounds. The years of counseling this young man is going to be in, right? The wounds, how hurt he's been, how disappointed he's been. Joseph could have easily said, wow, finally my luck is beginning to change. That's what he could have said. Could have been eager to go for it, except the one part of knowing that it would be wrong. Let's talk about temptation number 2. Temptation number 2, we got to watch out for this in the midst of change, is to treat yourself to a moral shortcut. When trials and transitions hit us the hardest, we tend to go less by what we know and more by what we feel. Does that make sense? We tend to feel like it's time to treat ourselves. You get a really bad call, you head straight for the ice cream, right? When a bad thing happens, we abandon our diets. You treat yourself. In an altercation, we give people a piece of our minds. We use words that we never expected we would use. We don't want to own them in the future, but man, right now, to say them to his or her face, ooh, that just feels so good for a moment, right? Like just giving a good hard scratch to a mosquito bite you should leave alone. Just I'm so tired of fighting this. I got to do it. It's going to feel good for a second. Treat yourself. When things get hard, we return to some addictive substance that used to make life easier for us. Now we realize it's made our lives worse. And we return to that because we need something to take the edge off. We want something to numb the pain. We want to provide some kind of, we have a harsh reality right now, and we want a little escape. Sometimes those escapes are virtual. We run to video games. We run to pornography. We run to chat rooms where we can be somebody else. We don't want to admit that we're living a double life, but I don't know, just in this moment, it makes things easier. Hard times bring these desires out of us where we feel convinced that somebody owes me a more pleasant reality. And if it is to be, it is up to me. And we look in the mirror and we decide we're just going to arrange that for ourselves. And we say, you know what? I'm going to treat myself. And there's Kevin McAllister right around the corner, just rubbing his hands together. That is the moment. Look, we go back to Joseph's story. I don't know an honest male alive who would believe his ears at what comes next, given Joseph's situation. But listen to how he responds. Verse 9, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? You know, he didn't say that just one time. He repeatedly turns down her advances. He doesn't flirt with her. He doesn't see how far he can push it. He doesn't test the waters. He starts running in the opposite direction. He starts avoiding her as much as is humanly possible. My hero. Can you imagine? Folks, I know it gets gruesome in the midst of change, but it is never impossible to take the high road and avoid the shortcuts. Look at a verse in 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul writes, the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. What is he saying by that? He's saying you're valuable to God. He knows your name. You're one of a kind, but you're not special. Like, people have been where you are before. You have been where you are before. People have been in worse situations than you have before. He's saying other people have experienced this, so don't use that as some epic excuse to say, woe is me, and there's nothing else, I have no other options here. It's not true. You got to watch out for that, because wrong is wrong, and God is faithful. This is a great thing. If God's going to be with you, this comes along with a reminder that he's holy. He's awesome. He's worth living our whole lives for. And how we spend, how we, the stuff we bring home from the company, how we spend company time, or what we do when nobody's watching, like all that stuff, we always do that in light of the fact that God's with us. And he's faithful, and he will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. He won't do it. He'll protect you from that. And when you're tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. Look, I know that when you and I are struggling and nobody is looking, that seems like the perfect time to have a cheat day on your character. No, that is the moment when your character will be proven. So don't do it. Don't do it. You got to do it in the power and strength that only God gives. But those are the moments that will prove your character. God is always watching, and he will always reward you better than you can reward yourself. That's a great moment to trust God. That's a great moment to give up on yourself. Follow God through that. Now, does Joseph get the medal he deserves? I wish I could say that happened in the next paragraph. Nope. Potiphar's wife is so put off that she frames him for assault. She has him thrown in prison. Wow. But don't miss this. Look at verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. Boy, this really messes with our tendencies to make changes go from bad to worse because what we assume about God. How much further from home base can Joseph get? Alcatraz? Like, what's it going to take? God, the Lord was with him. There's nothing worse than being a slave, right? Well, how about a prisoner slave? Yeah. And the Lord is with him. You might be in an unthinkable place in your life. The Lord was with him and shared his faithful love with him. I mean, it really makes you wonder. Like, in life, if you knew that taking the high road would send you what appears to be the long way around, like Joseph refusing Potiphar's wife. Like, the high road takes me the long way around, but the guarantee is that God will be with you on the ride. Would you take it? I think you would. You can be in actual chaos in your life, in your family, in your finances, at your job. Actual chaos, and God can be with you in that. Just like you can have awesome circumstances in life, and God's not behind it. Awesome circumstances in life, and God is not for it. He's not in it. And that's what leads us to The third temptation we want to talk about in the midst of change. We got to watch out for this. Temptation number 3 is to take the credit and forget God. And if I'm sitting where you're sitting, listening to what we're listening to, I don't know that I would have seen that one coming. But temptation number 3 is to take the credit and forget God. This is how Joseph's story unfolds. Now he's a prisoner. And one day out of nowhere, 2 fellow inmates have a real wild and crazy dream. And Joseph says to them, hey, let me help. Let me help, because interpreting dreams is the business of heaven. It's the business of the divine. It's God's business. And I know God. He interprets their dreams for them. Those dreams actually come to pass. They go from dream to real. And years later, that is what puts Joseph in the courts of the Pharaoh of Egypt, who also had a pretty crazy dream. And none of his diviners, none of his magicians, none of his wise men can interpret it. And that's what jogs the memory of the cupbearer. And he says, man, years ago I talked to this guy named Joseph. And there Joseph is talking to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, word on the street is that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph, consistent to what he said before, says it again. He says, that's impossible for me. But it's very simple for God. See where the credit goes each and every time? And when that dream is made clear and it brings relief to the entire palace, Joseph gives God the credit and the glory. And when that turn of events creates a new job opening and Pharaoh's looking for one person to rule over the entire land for him because of the oncoming crisis that the dream revealed, Joseph doesn't even throw his name in the hat. It's Pharaoh's idea. It's the government's idea. It's the leader's idea. They're like, this guy's got the Spirit of God in him. Let's ask him to do it. And that's what puts Joseph second in command of the entire nation. That's what gets him, he gets a wife and kids out of the deal. And how he names his kids make it very clear that he understands something. None of this is about me. It's all about God. And even when the moment comes, the unthinkable happens. And in a long food line that is now parading through Egypt, because they're surviving when everyone else is dying, and includes all of his brothers who sold him out years before and lied on him and pretended like he was dead when they had actually abandoned him. Forgave them. Because he understood something. It's not about me. It's about God. Key line from his story, Genesis 50:20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. That's a person who knows it's not about me. Yeah, it hurt. Yeah, it stung. But there's more going on. There's more important people in the room. It's the God who was with me this entire time. And this is what I'm hoping you and I extract and take with us into the changes of life, is that we sometimes survive the change. And you and I, we go on to, we live to tell the story about how we battled through cancer, how we endured the custody battle, how we, we pulled through the crisis, and we tend to make our stories about who? About us. And don't you think that'd be kind of a messed up way to end Joseph's story? After the constant reminders along the journey that God never left him, and it was God providing for him, and it was God empowering him, and God investing in him. Do you think it'd kind of be messed up that right before the credits roll, you got Joseph standing on a tower going, yeah, I did it. But this is the temptation. It's a very real temptation on the backside of change. It's to forget God. Do you remember the proverb that we touched on over the summer? It goes like this: pride comes before the fall. The fall. We know this about pride. We're talking about how in a change we can make things go from bad to worse. This is a great way to do it. It's reminded me of a warning that we get in the Old Testament. The Israelites received this warning. They got it in spades. They got it multiple times in the book of Deuteronomy. They got it again throughout the book of Joshua. These people, these Israelites, had been miraculously saved, rescued from slavery. That does not happen. Furthermore, God said, I want to have a personal relationship with you. I got a beautiful land picked out where this new nation can flourish. It's got occupants. They think it's theirs. They've always been wrong. I've had it set aside for you the entire time. I just need you to go and push them out. That does not happen. And God told them as they were making the move, watch out. Watch out, because the day is coming when you're living in a land that you didn't before know existed. You're going to be living in houses that you did not build. Living in flourishing cities that you didn't develop. You're living in houses that are stocked with goods that you didn't produce. Drawing wells out of cisterns that you never dug. Eating from vineyards and trees that you didn't plant. Be careful. Do not become proud at that time and forget that the Lord your God is the one who rescued you. He did this to humble you and test you for your own good. He did all of this so that you would never say to yourself, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful. It's one more temptation to avoid. Can I just talk to you? If you're on your way through a change, this is always what happens in a change. It either kills you and sends you to heaven, where it's always up and to the right from there. Or you survive the change, right? We like to say this, it'll kill you or make you stronger. I think there's some truth to that. And if you are currently surviving a change and you're on the back end of a change, can I just show you what it looks like when you don't forget God, but you remember God? It changes your testimony, the story that you have to tell. People who walk with Jesus end up with more and more examples of how good God is. They have evidence. They've lived it. You don't go on from that sharing some warped version of reality where you were the hero, where you were the good guy. No, like every new worship song becomes this moment of tenderness and this tear-jerking experience for you, because you know that your life is becoming less and less about what you did and what God has done. When you remember God through the change, can I tell you, people who don't forget God, they remember God. They are not controlled by past wounds. They're not controlled by past bitterness, because you tend to grow in humility. You become quicker and more eager to forgive others because you've seen the bigger picture. And you're not about to live a life that pretends that you were the main character and it was about you. You just know it's all about God. That's what it looks like when you don't forget God, when you remember God. You become a person, change after change, disappointment after disappointment, who grows in generosity. Starts to pick up steam. You use your influence. You use your resources. You start using your relationships to bless others, because you remember a day when you had nothing and God blessed you with everything, and he entrusted you to manage it all from there with his heart beating inside your chest. And you don't walk around your life talking about what you are still owed. You walk around your life talking about what God gave and all you have to give. This is what I want for us today. That change after change, disappointment after disappointment, we realize that it was always about God and where he was and what he was doing. Joseph demonstrates the great responses that we can have in those moments. And we just need to know, change is coming for me. Change is coming for you. And no matter what that change is, no matter how devastating maybe how it lands in your life, that change will never be big enough to change God's faithful love for you and demonstrate his greatness in your life and give you an opportunity to discover what he's about to do next and how you can tell his story. I want to pray right now and give us a chance to sort of just take our own prayer posture. And I just want to say, for anybody in this room today, especially if you've been here for a few weeks and you know how all about Jesus we are, I just want to connect some dots for you. As the generations went on from Joseph and God's people, he continually promised he was going to send one person who would lead and save, and that's his son Jesus. And I want you to know that when God had every right to abandon people like us, not only did he never abandon us, he sent his son Jesus to live with us. They called him Emmanuel, God with us. You're never rejected. You're never abandoned when you belong to God. It's Jesus. He took zero moral shortcuts. He lived a perfect life so that on our behalf, he could die in our place. It's the most evil thing that went down over the course of human history when the Lamb of God was beaten and crucified, and yet what they meant for evil, God meant for good. It paved the way for your forgiveness. I just want you to know you don't have to leave this room wondering where you stand with God, because he has paid the highest price so that you could be adopted into his family. He sent us Jesus, and he's not sending anyone else. Jesus matter-of-factly said, I'm the door, I'm the gate, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. Is today the day you'll be willing to put your trust in him? You could tell him this, from your heart to his, he can hear you. You would say, hey, I want to admit, I've reacted poorly. There are plenty of reasons why you would not let me into your holy presence. I've called them errors, mistakes, sometimes rebellion. You call it all sin. And today I'm putting my trust in the fact that you sent Jesus to die for my sin and pave the way that I could be forgiven. I accept that as a free gift, not just of your love for today, but for my hope for tomorrow and my belonging to your family for eternity. That is a free gift that you can accept. That is a promise of God that he does not leave or forsake his kids. God, thank you for being with us here in this place today. Thank you that you are the same God that was with Joseph in the depths of his brokenness and his circumstance. And Father, we pray that you would give a specific kind of courage to every person in this room. None of us know what's happening on Tuesday. We want to be ready to watch out, ready to fight the kind of temptation that would take us off course and help us destroy ourselves. Instead, Father, we want to remember that it's all about you and that you never leave and that your love endures forever. I ask that in moments like these, you would drive that right into our hearts.